Right. How we doing, everyone? This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today I want to talk to you guys about our mad search for identity. And so we're going to be touching on a whole host of kind of topics. It's going to be sort of a freewheeling conversation. It's not so much structured as some of the other presentations or discussions that I set forth. But today we're going to be focusing on really the sort of effects of the cultural and traditional degradation of Western civilization and how this has spawned what a lot of people have deemed a identity crisis or a crisis in identity. And so that's kind of the idea for today's video that we are going to get into. This was really just kind of off the cuff from a conversation I was having with Subdeacon Mark and some of the people at my parish. And this was a topic that I was already thinking about. It's sort of the varieties of identity and how people are trying to establish themselves in the world right now. And so we're going to be touching on consumerism. We're going to be touching on politics and corporations. We'll be touching on even sports, race, all these different ways, and how people begin to establish and demonstrate who they are or gain a sort of sense of identity in society. So that's really what we're going to be getting into. And I got my cup of joe here, so I am ready to rock and roll. But let me turn this light on. Okay. So just give me a thumbs up in the chat. Make sure everything's going all right. Sound good. Video good. Thumbs up in the chat will definitely suffice for an indicator that we are good to go here. But before I go any deeper, of course, I'm going to make the same old pitch as I normally do. If you guys enjoy what we're doing or what I'm doing over on this YouTube channel, if you'd like to support, would greatly appreciate anybody who can to go to my website, davidpatrickharry.com, davidpatrickharry.com. In fact, let me throw that up here. So here's the title of our video today, our mad search for identity. And underneath that, let me just throw in so if you can if you're able, go to my website, top right hand corner, there's a donate button. The reason I ask is this is how I'm trying to move forward and do this stuff full-time professionally in regards to doing the sort of public intellectual stuff. And in the next couple of weeks, we're building out, we're going to be doing half the live streams off my own server, and those are going to be for members only. So if anybody signs up for $5 or more, you will automatically get a website membership as soon as that becomes available. And so if that sounds like something you'd be interested, I would greatly appreciate that. But without further ado, let's get into our topic today. Again, this is just if you guys are able and you would like to support, go to the website. And of course, today we'll always be doing super chat. So if during the conversation something comes up that you want to talk more about, you want to ask me a specific question, or you just want to show some love, that's always greatly appreciated. So I just wanted to say that. But again, let's go back over. Today, we're going to be talking about the sort of the crisis in identity, current and Western civilization. Of course, general tone and tenor of my videos, we're going to be focusing really on sort of white men, European-based men with European heritage, because it is them who have no sense of identity. We're going to really start to get into our conversation today and the degradation of Western civilization. What is it that you're passing on from generation to generation? What is it that you represent within your culture? What is it that you're trying to protect exactly? And so when we look into these questions, I think we begin to sort of probe deeper into the problems of modern society. And the void of identity is going to be filled by consumerism, generally speaking. So like one of the forms that we're going to be getting into later is corporations and how, you know, the Louis Vuittons, we've talked about this in previous videos, but brands themselves And really, I'm thinking in my mind, I'm looking at post-World War II America, sort of the last 3-4 generations, the baby boomers and all that stuff, how the lackadaisical sort of passing on tradition and values to children, to whoever, our families, our extended families, has really kind of gone astray, right? We don't really do that. We don't have sort of a traditional framework to pass on. So that then leads us to gaining our identity through the brands that we buy, the Louis Vuittons, like I said, and then that leads to the sense how we're manipulated because we have no tradition, and this is due to the loss of religion. We have no real sense of morality, and so then what comes to fill in our sort of moral vacancy within ourselves, other than corporations and politics, for example, or ideologies of one sort or another? So you can get into social justice warriors, you can get into even critical race theory. We're going to be talking about that. These are ways for these sort of secularized people who have no real traditional foundation that they're standing on. Of course, from an apologetical standpoint that we do on this channel, we would totally deconstruct their worldview that really, whether it comes to the laws of logic, right? We talk about the philosophical transcendentals, that they can't account for them, that their world, even though they see themselves as such progressive, contemporary people really looking out for the best of the world, right? The sort of global, usually is sort of ecological consciousness related to climate change, all that stuff, that they see themselves as a step ahead of the rest of the world. But from what I want to present today is really the step forward is a step in the absence of true identity, a true cultural heritage, a true traditional framework for an understanding. And so that's why then the people who I think would fit in that general description that I've already laid out, their politics, their okaying of what we would consider sexual immorality or abnormalities in regards to culture or traditional values or things that just should be normalized within society, that they're going to be okay with the child transgenderism, right? With puberty blockers and this types of thing, because they see themselves as progressives. Is going to lead to narcissism, and as we've always talked about, a sort of self-worship. So all that stuff's going to be tied into it. But there's also all these different forms that we go astray, because the framework for today's conversation is your identity based in the creator or within creation? And that's really the distinction, because if your identity is in God, if your identity is in something that's transcendent, the creator itself, well, that is a little bit different than using created forms like the politics, like the corporations, but also like race. And this is where we see, especially the young white men, turn towards sort of supremacist rhetoric in regards to race. Now, we can talk about IQ, we can talk about racial differences. I'm all good for that. But if we begin with the premise that God created all people, well, then outright sort of subjugation and supremacy isn't going to fit in our paradigm. But race becomes another way in which we form our identities. Well, that's all part of creation, right? Our bodies are part of created order. So our ultimate identity can't be found in race. It can't be found in our nationality. We have to be able to see beyond created forms. And so, let's see here. We got SS says he cucked on race. Oh, did I? Boy, has no idea about my my opinions, but the idea that our sole identity has to be racial, because even if we get into sort of race, like if we use critical race theory, then we start just using phenotypes to describe racial groups like white, black, yellow, brown, all this stuff. Well, that has nothing to do with actual real racial groups and real genetic lineages. If we look at Germanic peoples, Celtic peoples, Scandinavian peoples, Nordic ancestry, that is real race. That is then where we're going to get into real tradition and real cultural heritage, which has all been rejected in the name of these larger abstract ideals like white. So So before we go any further, then I think it's useful to talk about how when you look at a lot of things, the identity of something is really rooted within what created it. So when you look at a tractor that's outside, you point at it, oh, somebody says, what is that? They say, oh, it's a John Deere. Well, John Deere is just who made the tractor. And so when we look at created things, whether it's televisions, products, consumerism generally, branding, right? These are forms of identity. And so this is also true for us. But who is our creator is going to be really important for us to really see how we relate and how we gain our full identity. So I have a few Bible verses that I pulled up to begin with to just hammer home this idea that from a Christian perspective, our identity is really found within God, and we have to start there. And when we because a lot of people aren't starting there, we revert to politics becoming our main source of identity, the things that we consume, our racial groups. Not that race isn't important. Race is very important. I've made multiple videos talking about that, talking about demographics in the United States, talking about the destruction of Europe in regards to mass Muslim immigration, all this stuff. So, I'm very comfortable going into those areas, but ultimately we can't get into supremacy rhetoric, or that would negate the idea that God created all people. And then it's like, what metric are you using? Because if we go into the bell curve or something like that, well, then we can see Asians they score certain levels on IQ, different people. So does that mean that Asians are the supremacists of the world because they measure higher on one particular category? Like, no, of course not. So we need to be more nuanced. We need to be more thoughtful about how we go about this. And so to begin the video then, John chapter 1 verse 12 says, "Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." Ephesians chapter 1 verse 5, he predestined us for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ in accordance with his pleasure and will. Romans chapter 15 verse 7, "Accept one another, then, just as Christ accepted you, in order to bring praise to God." Colossians chapter 2 verse 9 and 10, "For in Christ all the fullness of the deity lives in bodily form, and in Christ you have been brought to fullness. He is the head over every power and authority." The reason I like that one, again, because us as Orthodox, we believe in a little something called Theosis. And so the whole point of the incarnation, the whole point of creation itself, right? Theoretically say Adam and Eve didn't even fall. They didn't eat from the tree of knowledge. What was the point of their journeying in the first place? What was the point of their being created in the first place? The whole idea is to become divinized, is to become sanctified, is to become synergized with the nature of God through theosis, which means us participating and enacting and trying to follow our icon in Christ. So right there, that reframes our whole identity. That the whole thing has to do with theosis. The whole thing has to do with being divinized. So 1 Corinthians chapter 6, 17, "But whoever is united with the Lord is one with him in spirit." Romans chapter 6, 6, "For we know that our old self was crucified with him so that the body ruled by sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves to sin." Genesis chapter 1 verse 27, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them." Again, we get our image from God. We don't have to get into a sort of theological discussion on free will, on language, on logic, and all this stuff. All that stuff is true. Personhood, we get our personhood from God himself. So again, very important in framing who we are and how we gain our identity. Now, I could go on, like Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 27, "Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it." So, anyways, This all comes back then to the loss of tradition. And the first one is ultimately going to be the loss of religion, the loss of any sort of traditionality within our culture. I mean, it's hard to say as Americans, as anybody. I don't know really. I mean, I guess you could say in the more southern parts of Europe, they still maintain, I'd say, a stronger Christian culture. But when you look at England, when you look at France, when you look at a lot of the Scandinavian countries, when you look at parts of Germany, when you look at America, it's hard to say these are Christian nations. Historically speaking, of course they are, but are they practicing in today's understanding of, the current structure of these countries? Are they participating or exuding Christian cultural quality? I would say no. For the most part, they are not. For the most part, it's totally secularized. It's totally, most of the time, it's sort of atheistic or perennialistic, or at least at an epistemological level, relativistic. I think we can all agree to that. So when you look at Pew, for example, so if we take the Pew Research Center, major source of demographic and sort of cultural knowledge within the U.S., but the world generally speaking. So if we look at religious demographics that are sent out, the idea that we're still a Christian nation is hard to even fathom. Now, if you put all Christian denominations together, yes, that is the dominant worldview within America. However, if you begin to separate Catholicism, Protestantism from each other, and then you start to do it, you'd see that spiritual but not religious is the single largest religious demographic in the United States. That was in 2017. So in regards to single demographics, nobody is at the same level as the spirit, and that is gaining speed. I would say the spiritual but not religious. A lot of people are moving into that. Again, a lot of us have come from there, right? And then somehow we found our way into a very traditional form of orthodoxy, which of course is beautiful and true, but at a cultural level, look at the we've talked about the sort of exports of the United States and how many of the the major exports of the United States is sexual degeneracy, it's LGBTQ stuff, it's transgenderism, it's absolute consumerism, it's Hollywood, right? How influential is Hollywood around the world? And so because of that, then Hollywood now makes movies for the world, and in so doing, then demonizes particular groups of people, like anybody with European ancestry. And that's going to be all tied back with critical theory, which I'm going to come to here in a few. So religion, to begin, to establish that, has been lost. Religion, traditionally speaking, is not a central pillar, I would say, in most Western nations. And because of this unfortunate event, this has done away with sort of our morality, the sort of sophistication of our culture. We can talk about technology and this or that, but I don't see that as necessarily being the sort of basis for a sophisticated society. In my mind, I think more of like manners and etiquette and the way people dress and the way people look and the way people, like high trust societies. A high trust society, to me, is way more advanced, way more, if you want to even use terms like progressive, than something with flat screen TVs, all the sort of computers, smartphones, all the technology that we are blessed with and able to use right now. But I would rather prefer a society that didn't have that, for a very traditional high trust place to raise children, to have experiences, to have relationships, right? Life is all about relationships. Christianity makes it explicit that it's all about communion with God, communion with each other, communication through the logos, through language, and community. All these things, this is the point. We are communal beings. We need each other. So the loss of religion, sadly, I think, is the first thing in regards to this loss of tradition. And then what are the effects of this? So I just kind of was thinking out loud and wrote down a list. And the first one is the traditional family, values, and knowledge. So because we've lost this sort of traditional framework, because we have no real cultural heritage, right? What is the cultural heritage? If you took, for example, I was actually recently in a conversation with some conservative guys, and I was talking about how Ben Shapiro's too progressive for me. How we were talking about Donald Trump. I said, "Oh well, he's too progressive for me," and they were like stunned, like, "Oh my gosh, Ben Shapiro, he's so conservative. He's like far right." And at the same time, these guys would identify as conservative. And I started to ask them, started probing them, and then, getting them to see how, what you hold really isn't that traditional, isn't that conservative at all, really. And neither does Ben Shapiro or Dan Crenshaw or a lot of these people, Steven Crowder. Crowder's probably a little bit better than some of the others, but still. Prager, Dennis Prager, Dave Rubin. I mean, come on. I started talking to them and really asking them, what is it that you're protecting, as what is it within your politics that you're trying to hold on to? And this was a very difficult question for them, because when you look at American cultural heritage, so much of it was then tied into forms of Protestant religion. You could also talk about Catholicism. So we can just speak Christianity generally speaking, but I mean, what is it? The Second Amendment? Is it the ability to own guns? Is it the sort of freedom spirit that is really just all rhetoric at this point, especially if you're going to your grocery store and you're wearing a mask, really? You're still wearing a mask after the CDC just redid their numbers and demonstrated that only 6% of their COVID death numbers were actually from COVID-19 and not from comorbidities. They didn't have pre-existing conditions. They weren't overweight, extremely old, all this stuff. And you're still wearing a mask? So what is it? Like in 2020, asking these guys, what is it that you're protecting? Because a lot of them wouldn't put God forward. When I go into these conversations and I'm sort of characterized as, oh, you're just this religious guy. You're talking about God and all this stuff. Sure. That's the angle that I'm coming from. But, when you dive deeper into these debates, when you dive deeper into these discussions, a lot of people haven't thought any of this stuff through. And so then forcing them to tell me what it is that they're protecting, it really just came down to this sort of idea of America, this sort of Americana concept that really doesn't exist anymore. And especially if you don't maintain demographics. And so that's when we start getting demographics. And that's when, they're without a particular group of people being the majority demographic of this country, even the Americana idea, which is already gone, doesn't even have a chance of existing. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that traditional family values and knowledge is going to be tied with our religious heritage. And so because we've lost so much tradition, I think about, we're kind of a self-selected group, because we talk about traditional value. Most of us watching this already have the same traditional values, yearnings for family. Most of us maybe want a homestead and all this stuff. So I'm speaking to the choir, generally speaking. But think about all the traditional forms of knowledge that if you and I were living 300 years ago, 200 years ago, even 100 years ago, plants, picking fruit, hunting, just around the house stuff, men doing handiwork. Again, I'm weak at this, right? One of my weak points is like automobiles, working on cars, something I need to work on as a man and develop that skill and that competency. But think about all these sort of traditional forms of knowledge, even related to nature and this or that we have totally been lost out on in the contemporary world. And that's why I think it's really useful to look at this stuff post-World War II forward, is really the sort of because we have the TV, we have the radio, we have all this stuff, and then the branding. Everybody knows that the baby boomers were subjected to a lot of propaganda and programming, and that's kind of why they are the way they are. But we've lost so much knowledge because of this. And that's why then without knowledge, without an understanding of history, as you guys know, I had a previous life where I promoted a lot of Terrence McKenna stuff. And one of the comments that he would make that I actually still hold and resonates a lot with me is that if you don't know your history, you have amnesia. And I feel like for a lot of people, when I speak to them, I don't know if it's because I do this stuff more frequently, Again, we're a sort of self-selected group, because when I talk to you guys, a lot of you guys are well-read. A lot of you guys do know history. A lot of you guys are on board with what's we're talking about and all this stuff. But just generally speaking, when you go and meet people our age, even if they are right of center, this or that, they have no historical framework. And if you don't know history, you can't see patterns. You do have amnesia. You can't see what's going on. And so I think, again, all that is tied to the loss of traditional family values and knowledge. And so next is the loss of the importance of a family name. How many men do you know that actually care about the continuation of their family name, what that family name stands for, what it means, and then raising children to carry it on? Unfortunately, it seems like that, with the loss of tradition, has gone away with. The importance of our family name, our surname. And think about that. With the loss of the importance of our family names and our surnames, we're forgetting our ancestors. We're forgetting the historical lineage and trajectory that all of us are on. History is still moving. The church is still living, right? All this stuff is still going to go on, and eventually we are going to be the people that lived 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Unless some of you guys who think we're actually in the end times, I guess you may have a little bit of a different perspective than others, but the importance of our family names and what our families represent. It seemed recently I went down to Tennessee and went to the Pigeon Forge area. That's a whole story in and of itself while I was down there. But spoke with people, and some of them were still carrying on. Again, they were based. They knew what was going on with the COVID stuff. They were conservative, traditional Christians, and they were still concerned with the family name. And it got me thinking, because a lot of the people that I interact with, they don't think in those terms. That's a very traditional mind frame, to think about your family name, what that represents, and maintaining that, and then building things for generations. How long term are you thinking? And I think so. Again, because of the destruction of tradition, because we're not thinking long term, this always leads back to the immediate moment, which leads to narcissism, which leads to hedonism. Because if our only focus is ourselves and our only time frame is the present moment, what else are we going to do besides engage in the most hedonistic things we can get our hands on? That's exactly what we're going to do. Because there is no deeper form of meaning, deeper sense of responsibility. There is no tradition to be rooted in. And the loss of the importance of our family name, I think that's something that's already occurred. But what exactly is passed on from generation to generation now? Right? I'm talking, let's think in the last 20 years, last 30 years. And this isn't for all people. We're just talking about generally speaking within culture. What are people passing on to their children? What is it, again, that family name? What is being passed from generation to generation to generation at this point? I think that's really difficult. Is it being a Democrat? Is it being a fan of the Detroit Lions or whoever it is? Is it being a Yankees fan? What is it that we as Americans, we as members of Western civilization, we as descendants of European ancestry, we as Christians, we as Orthodox Christians, what is it that we pass on from generation to generation? What is it? And I'd say, again, because the loss of traditional values, the loss of cultural heritage, there isn't a whole lot that we're passing on. Now, another question that I ask is, are we proud of our ancestors? Are we proud of how do you have an identity that's not rooted in your ancestors, right? We see within the BLM and sort of the Black Online movement, the We Was Kings, talking about Africa, all this stuff. And so at least there's an open pride about usually a sort of false narrative of history, from my understanding. But we as white European Christian men, are we proud of our ancestors? Are we going to make excuses for them, right? We see the desecration and the destruction of George Washington monuments, Abraham Lincoln statues, Christopher Columbus. Again, I'm not a big fan of Christopher Columbus necessarily speaking, but all these guys represent something. And the destruction of all this stuff is highlighting now that they're racist or this or that. They held up white supremacy or the patriarchy, this or that. That unfortunately a lot of people are not proud of their ancestors. Unfortunately, a lot of people who take on that white guilt, who they almost want to apologize. They do apologize often, but they want to apologize not for themselves, but just for their ancestors in general. And again, usually without any historical knowledge or understanding to put this stuff in. So it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. So are we proud of our ancestors? And I'd say, again, because we've lost tradition, we've lost cultural heritage, for a lot of people, that answer is no. They're not proud of their ancestors. They don't care about the importance of their family name. They don't care about traditional knowledge. They want to live in cities, right? They want to live off the system. And so a lot of that times then that leads to an absence of religion as well, right? Just want to say, FYI, for those who haven't, please smash that like button. It always helps with the algorithm. I apologize. So anybody who's in here who's watching, please hit that like button. Lawson just says, Christians need men like this to rise. Good things will come into place the more we support individuals like DPA. Oh, thanks, brother. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it seems like things are going good in the chat. The United States was to be free from an established religion so that religion could flourish, not diminish. Right, and we see how well that's gone about. Because the ultimate value structure, the ultimate religion of America, of course, is secularism. So without a single established national religion, what you then dive into is essentially, in my opinion, is secularism, is atheism, is the absence of religion. And so when you look at then, and I think that's tied at a theological level with Protestantism, and that's why then every Protestant nation you look at in Europe is extremely cucked and is in no way still a Christian nation, because there's inherent problems within the theology of Protestantism. But I digress, and I will leave you guys in the chat to do what you want. Oh, Tim responded again and said, the lefties have subverted/inverted our tradition. I don't think it's the lefties. You know, to me, it's on individual men. If men never compromised their values and they were outspoken about it, and then they built groups about it, and that was a form of identity about it, we wouldn't be in the position we are today. We're in the position we are today because men have become so weak that they don't defend anything. Again, because what do they defend? They defend tradition. This is why Orthodoxy only has male clergy, because it's men who defend tradition, nations, truth, families. That's what is the father for? The mother is with the children. The father then goes and protects. That is the role of men. That is why we're made with more muscular tonation. That's why we have more muscular density on our bodies. It's because we have a different role. We are the protectors, and we haven't protected a single, not you or I, I'm speaking generally, but as Western civilization, what have we protected? What have we protected? What have we defended? And so we can point to the degenerates, the leftists and stuff, and so I don't disagree with you totally, Tim, but I think the ultimate responsibility has to come back on us. We have to say, no, I don't give a damn what they do or say or try to do or get inside of our traditions, because my friends, the men that I'm in, my family, they're not going to go with it. And so the stronger that we are, the stronger and more vocal we are, and the alliances we build, and we say, no, we're not going to do that, period, full step, full stop, then it ends there. And so Tim responded real quick. I'll read it out. He said, that was to be established through the people that came to America. If America was founded and populated with Russian Orthodox people, but it wasn't. I think you're missing my point, Tim. So I'm going to move on. But the idea is that that somehow all this stuff has been corrupted from the leftists and all this stuff. That's totally the wrong way to think about it. Because those leftists, the culture that allows all those young people that are supporting BLM or they're in Portland or Seattle or wherever they're at, how did the culture arise that allows them to be who they are and gives them the weaponry, whether it be ideologically speaking, culturally speaking, institutional power? How did all that stuff come into place? And it's not just leftists inverting or subverting, though they do. It's men being weak. It's men being weak and not upholding tradition and not defending tradition. And again, scientism, all this stuff, and it's been difficult, right? And that's why then America, because it was Protestant, it was continually moving. It was wrapped up with that post-Enlightenment idea of progress. And so it's clearly been progressing all the way towards LGBTQ flags and BLM flying outside Protestant churches. That's not exactly Christianity. And all that stuff is symptomatic of the loss of tradition, right? Because those same churches then have women in the pulpits. So we have to realize that the maintenance of society, it's always on men. It's on men educating themselves, building up themselves physically, spiritually, getting in connection with God, being repentful, living a good life. It's on us. And so once you realize that too, it's like, man, we have all the power, right? Because even this culture here, this fallen, nasty American culture that we live in right now, how many of those progressives in Portland or the BLM, how many of them are going to have a bunch of children? How many of them are going to be successful in the next 20 to 40 years? How many of them are going to really contribute to building? They're not. They're not. So even though it's chaos, even though it seems like, again, they do have an upper hand at an institutional level, we have the power. We have the power by being more in line with God, by living more traditionally, and then finding wives, getting homesteads, having multiple children, then raising them up in our values. Again, if you have multiple sons and your sons and you get them in line, that is how we take back over. That is how we take over, is through our values and acting those and living those out and not compromising as men. Too many, again, this is a lot of it has to do with the baby boomers, and you can place blame on them, but also realize that they were subjected to a lot of propaganda post World War II with the invention of television and all that stuff. So, anyway, so then we can look at, so talking about ancestry, talking about family names, talking about what's being passed on from generation to generation. And then we can look in the academy, we can look at a sort of intellectual level and see things like deconstructionism, which is fundamentally in opposition to the metaphysics of Christianity. I mean, that's the basis of it. Or postmodernism, which is related to deconstructionism. And it absolutely being a severing of the historical lineage of Western civilization, because that is what they want to end. Very open about that. This shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. I'm sure it's not to most of you guys. But the postmodernism, the whole point is to re-envision this like weird future, right? So now we see Kamala Harris talking about the re-envisionment of policing, and it's going to get into these weird things with social workers and all this stuff. I mean, it's just, it's funny. It's sad at this point. It's like, it's a whole bag of emotions. But postmodernism, to another angle of it in regards to this traditional stuff and the continuity of tradition and cultural heritage throughout time, postmodernism as an ideology, because it's so relativistic and is in opposition to those things, because there is no objectivity, it's a severing of the historical importance of these things. And so we're being attacked then also at an intellectual level. A lot of people, are buying into these things, whether they're conscientious of it or not. And this leads then to critical race theory, right? Because that's going to be branched into all this different stuff. So I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with like critical race theory. This is where we're going to get concepts of the patriarchy and white privilege and all this stuff and a lot of the rhetoric. And so one of the good things that Trump's done recently, he's ended a lot of the critical race education within, well, I wouldn't say he's ended it. He's he's made an executive order to do what he can, and people have already come out in opposition. They're going to continue it, but basically their critical race theory education, their diversity training is what they call it. And diversity, and it's so funny because I actually saw an article earlier today. I should have grabbed it for today's video. It didn't even register till right now, but there was an article I saw being shared online of a radical leftist talking about how diversity is a code term for the eradication of like white men or something, or whiteness. I forget how it was worded. And so the fact that they even wrote that article highlights, not that I'm saying everybody who uses the term diversity is actually thinking in those concepts, because I don't think they are, but the ideology at an intellectual and academic level, the critical race theory, the postmodernism, the deconstructionism, all this stuff is exactly in opposition to Western civilization. So no wonder then that people then are wrapped up into this diversity crap, that they literally talk about the eradication of whiteness or white men or anything like that, because that is really, if you took all their ideas seriously, that's what it leads to. Now, I don't think ultimately, of course they can't do that. And so what it's eventually going to lead to is actual physical violence. Now, we've already seen that happen. We see Kyle Rittenhouse, Wisconsin. We see what's going on in Portland. We see the Trump supporter that got killed on the sidewalk. So we see the beginning of the Civil War. It's already here. The actual violence is already here. People are already being killed in the name of what? George Floyd, police brutality, right? Black men, 13 of them dying a year from a white officer. Mind you, all the black on black crime and deaths per year. So none of it really makes sense. It's all really crazy. And so the critical race theory is just a way to demonize men, then demonize white men, and that demonizes the sort of central pillar, as we talked about with phallogocentrism, of Christianity generally speaking. And that is the point of a lot of this critical race crap. And all that stuff, again, is a severing, just with the postmodern, it's a severing of our traditional lineage, of our cultural heritage. And it's not that they already did that, it's not that they are doing that, because it's already happened. Like I said, I would say the last, 60, 70 years, a lot of this stuff is already slowly being severed until to the point now it's like I said, what is being passed on from generation to generation? What are the ultimate values? What are the ultimate importance? Like at a societal level, what are we doing? So men have no foundation to lead from because of our tradition being severed, because most people aren't participating or even knowledgeable about stuff that are men then. And so the crisis in masculinity, all this stuff, I think, is related to the degradation of tradition and cultural heritage, because they have no foundation to lead from. Men are leaders. Men need to lead. If you're in an Orthodox church, Orthodoxy is very clear about that. But how do you lead? In what way are you leading? What embodiment of leadership are you taking on? And without religion, without deeper understandings of tradition, without deeper understandings of culture, I don't see it. I don't see it. It's like you have no foundation. How do you lead? Well, you don't even know what's right or wrong. How can men lead if from their worldview they think sodomy is equal to producing children? How do men lead if they think turning their 7-year-old boy into a girl with puberty blockers is okay? On what groundwork are they getting those values from? Are they getting them through history? Are they getting them through tradition? Are they getting them from our ancestors? Where are they getting these values? And it's, they're getting them from the secular society, from the fallen world, from really the opposition, if you will. And that's why, again, this is the masculinity crisis, the degradation of tradition. These are one and the same thing. And that's what I was trying to highlight with this point in regards to men have no foundation to lead from. Because in what direction, like leading means you're moving towards something. If we've already established that religion is no longer important, how can men lead? How can they lead women? How can they lead other men? What are they leading each other towards? And I think ultimately it becomes money, right? Because we've done away with God. because God isn't the source of not just where we get our identity, which we started with talking about this video, as that is where we get our identity. You know, what direction are you moving? You have no orientation in the world because you have no God, because you have no tradition, because you have no culture, because you have no wisdom. You have no wisdom. You have no wisdom. And that I feel like is so apropos then when we start to look at the culture that we're totally embedded in. But again, another one that I have, this is all, so I'm getting ready to go into a next section, but this is all for those that have joined. Please smash that like button if you can. Would really appreciate that. Anybody who's just joined, thank you for coming in. But I have a section here where we're going to talk about false forms of ID or identity. I just write down ID, but false forms of identity where people then, because of the situation that I'm trying to highlight, and I still have a few more points, this is all in regards to the loss of tradition. And so the next one that I wanted to say was false forms of morality lead people astray. And so because, as we've already talked about, the destruction of tradition and religion itself within our society, where do people get their morality from? How do they make moral decisions? And unfortunately, they get it from the world. Now, of course, again, as you guys know, as I know, as any more sophisticated thinker knows, they can't justify their morality without God and all this stuff. And really, it just falls into a borrowing of Christian morality when they want, and then total relativism the majority of the time. But the false sense of morality is what gives people an even tighter grip on these created forms of identity, like the social justice warrior. The social justice warrior, like their identity, whether it be you want to use the white savior complex, you want to use narcissism, you know, they fall into these patterns of narcissism, but the social justice warrior, their whole, you know, let alone their morality is mostly relativistic because they won't be able to justify it, but their identity is doing what? Creating social justice, which means that there are no more men's and female, male and female bathrooms. This is social justice, allowing cross-dressers to go into the little girl's room. This is social justice. So morale, but to them, they're the moral figures. They have the high ground. They have the moral high ground. And then you can see how that whole enterprise is then wrapped up within BLM, because BLM, those who support, see themselves as having the moral high ground over all those people, all those nasty, dirty, backwards white people who aren't supporting BLM because they're either overtly, explicitly, or more esoterically racist. Now, that's obviously not the case, but that prepackaged sense of morality can only be played for people who don't have a God, who don't have a tradition, who don't have a cultural heritage. Those who do have a God, those who do have a tradition and a culture, aren't going to be swept up with these false forms of morality, whether it be the cultural or the corporate 500, the Fortune 500, the top corporate Fortune 500 companies, like with the BLM, how then they start advocating for black-owned businesses, this or that. BLM, in the name of emotion, in the name of morality, in the name of justice, all these things are supposed to evoke, really, again, emotion from you. They all are attempts to lead you towards manipulation. It is all manipulation. And the only way to not be manipulated is to not be getting a sense of value of one's morality from those things. So the tradition, being religious, having a religious tradition, this is essential in not being swept up. And that's why, because most of Protestant Christianity now is the religion of be a good person. Today at church, the homily, our father mentioned that, I think it was actually a Pew study. We already mentioned Pew research in this video, but a Pew study talked about Christians in America and how it was like 52% do not believe that Jesus is God, but he was a great moral teacher. And as soon as you make that Aryan step, you can totally see then the LGBTQ, the BLM, and all this stuff, because now Jesus is just an enlightened figure. He's just a moral teacher. And therefore, if he's a moral teacher, what does he teach? He teaches the religion of be a good person. And be a good person means don't offend somebody. And don't offend somebody means you're okay with the fact that they're giving their child hormone blockers, that you're okay with the fact that, some man has a relationship with a child. You don't want to offend people. Like, don't you want to be a good person? Don't you understand love is love? You don't know that? This is 2020. And so these are all forms of moral manipulation. They're false forms of morality that aren't real. They're consumed, they're purchased, they're bought, and then they manipulate those people. And so all this stuff, this whole loss of tradition, what else does it equal to? It equals to lower birth rates. Lower birth rates. And even related to this, if you look at, Catholics were always known for having so many children. So in America, I think it's, again, an interesting comparison. If you look at like the, move pre-Vatican II, if you will, that period in America between Protestants also had quite a few children because they needed to, especially if you lived on a farm or anything like that. You needed farm hands. So historically speaking, they were having children, sometimes for more pragmatic reasons. But within Catholicism, and I'm not advocating for Catholicism, but they had more and more children. There was a tradition that allowed and perpetuated and reinforced and gave a theology, a framework for that higher birth rate. And so now we live in a society where that tradition is gone. Our cultural heritage is eradicated. Our ancestors are deemed racist and people that we should hate and denigrate and not want to associate with. Now we have extremely low birth rates, right? Is that true for the Hispanics? No. So is that true for the Muslim? No, they don't have low birth rates. Why is that? Are they still rooted to a tradition? Are they still rooted to a sort of cultural heritage that normalizes that and valorizes that, gives it an importance, right? So the lower birth rates in our society, it shouldn't be surprising. Look at what's going on. Look at the absence of tradition. We could get into a lot of the reasons, other reasons regarding the low birth rates, birth control, sexual immorality, sexual liberation, post-1960s counterculture, all this stuff. We can get, yep. But I just say all those things are sort of symptomatic of the larger problem of the absence of tradition, the absence of something so important that we want to take it, that we learned it from our parents, and we're going to give that to our children so they can give it to their children. What is that? What is that? And that's why ultimately I don't see that anywhere in America unless you're typically a traditional or conservative Christian. Whatever denomination that takes, that's on you. But my interaction, just like I talked about Pigeon Forge, and interacting with some of those people, again, maybe they're Baptists, they may be Church of Christ, whatever, but they get it. They see what's going on, whether it be the COVID-19, the vaccines, the social agenda, all this stuff, BLM, the riots. They get it. And then the passing on of the tradition, they also get that. So Christianity and being traditional is essential for us seeing this stuff, because if you're caught up in the modern world, if you're so interested in like the next Apple product that's coming out, not that you can't be and also do all this stuff. I know I don't mean to pick on anybody in any way, but if your whole identity is wrapped up in consumerism and maybe you make, $120,000 a year, you got a nice job, you work for someone, your corporation, who you work for actually does negative things out in the world, but that doesn't matter because it makes a nice paycheck, pays for my lifestyle and all this stuff. That what is it that you're going to give to your children? It's going to be more and more products. You may want to give them experiences. Because I'm flashbacking in my experience with like progressive parents and stuff like that. So they may travel a lot, allow their children to see Hawaii or go international or do that because they have the money, they have the abilities to do that. But what are the values? What is the compass, right? We're talking about orientation. If men leading, to lead means to move in a particular direction. Now, my point was that you can't lead without moving towards God, because God is the ultimate leader. Christ then is the incarnation of God to show us where to go. He is our icon. That is who we move towards. By moving towards him, we become more like him. That is the process of theosis. If you don't have that Christian compass, you have no orientation. And sadly, I think that's going to be the case for a lot of young people who grow up with these progressive parents, who hopefully they eventually come into the church through guys like you guys listening, that you can evangelize and reach out to these people. Not that you know any of them right now. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I'm just saying from my experience, again, living in California for a few years and just seeing young kids and then how they relate to their parents and the sort of friendly banter between parents. Like my dad was a military guy. He was a helicopter pilot. And the role between mother and father, and then my relationship between father and son, very distinct. And I am so thankful for that. The older I get, the more thankful I am for my parents, because I see these young people, or even had friends that had parents that are more like friends. Like you hang out with them, they're like 16, 17, they're already drinking with their dad, and then you see how they turn out, And the goal of a parent is not to be your friend. You can be friends once you're also a fully, adult. Once you're a full adult. But until then, you're a parent. And the parent is not a friend. And when you are a friend as a parent, you're not parenting, and therefore that child is going, they're not getting what they need. They're not getting the education. They're not getting even the social relationship, the dynamic, the real dynamic between a father and a son. And having that dynamic is what's going to allow that young man then to do that for their son, or want to do that for their son. So, sorry, don't know how I got down that rabbit hole, but one of the last things that I wanted to say too is that the absence of tradition means that all lines can be crossed and leads to pure hedonism. I already mentioned this, but I wanted to just emphasize this again, is that tradition equals boundaries. Whether you explicitly think about that or not, it's obviously true. That's what, the boundaries are what give contour and form to what then you're calling or pointing to that tradition. So traditions have boundaries, and those boundaries have to be maintained. And if those boundaries aren't maintained, then it's no longer the same tradition. And again, because our society has sadly fallen into the places that it has, all boundaries can be crossed now, because there is no tradition holding up against those. Now, for some people there are, and again, I think the 2020, we've talked about the memetics and the semiotics of 2020 and perfect vision and seeing clearly, and how this year has really done that for a lot of people, which I still think is absolutely true and still happening. That one of them is the absence of tradition allows for pure hedonism. So that's 2020, the seeing clearly is that the people who are still rooted within a Christian morality, even, again, how loosely you would define that, right? Say they're still voting Democrats, or all, because you're seeing a lot of these, again, to use secular political language, a lot of these American Democrats, mostly boomers, not happy with the BLM, not happy with the rioting. So then they now converting over to be Republicans and all this stuff, that they're seeing the chaos, they're seeing the hedonism, they're seeing the transgression of all boundaries, and they want some order, right? They want Trump to do stuff, and that's why they're converting political parties. But I think generally speaking, with the pedophilia stuff, whether you want to get into Epstein Island, the pedophile elites, the Cuties show, I don't know if you guys saw this, but on Netflix, they were going to put out, I think there was enough backlash that they actually ended up stopping, but the Cuties thing was basically a sort of sexualization of like an 11-year-old girl doing like some twerking and doing a dance team, and it was just disgusting. And guess what? It was promoted by a pedophile. And it's like, Are there any boundaries? Are there? Of course, again, there are, right? The people who live the lives, who then can see all this stuff, they have the boundaries. They're in the good. They're in the truth. But as a society, what happened? What happened, right? Anything goes in America, apparently. And ultimately, so all this stuff, all this loss of tradition, then, this is what it ultimately comes to. This is my last point for the loss of tradition section, is it loses the uniqueness of a group of people. And so if you were wanting to destroy or mess with or manipulate a group of people, what would be the first thing you would want to do? It would be to destroy and attack their traditions. Because it is those traditions that pass on generational wisdom, generational knowledge, in a multitude of different forms, lived knowledge, actual bookish knowledge, how we grow, how we interact with nature. All this stuff is related to sort of cultural heritage. And when you attack tradition and eventually destroy tradition, ultimately you've destroyed the uniqueness of those people. And therefore they have no identity. That's what identity is. It's the uniqueness of each individual. Right? Now, if you want to get theologically speaking, we're talking about personhood and all this stuff, but it comes down to the uniqueness of different people groups. And by destroying tradition, by destroying people's cultural heritage, or even the way that they understand their own tradition, and then maybe even demonize their own ancestors, which we've already seen in this country, we've seen in Europe, generally speaking, that destroys the identity. That destroys the uniqueness of entire groups of people. And so where do they go from there? And once you've destroyed it, you can take them anywhere. And so pretty soon they'll start wearing a face mask during a fake pandemic, when none of the numbers that even the authorities that they believe in put out justify the measures that they're enacting. And yet they're still going along with it. And it's because they have nothing. They have no real sense of identity. They have no tradition. They have no inherited wisdom. They literally consume everything. You know, whether it be Fox News or MSNBC, same thing. Whether it be Nike or Louis Vuitton, same thing. And so that, I think, is really helps highlight the sort of sinister nature behind all this. I know I didn't even get into that, you know, maybe why somebody want to do this, or groups of people, or Satan, or the yada yada. We didn't even get into the whys, but the whole point of the loss of tradition, whether, you know, the whys would be another conversation, but ultimately it's about the destruction of the uniqueness of a group of people. And where do those people go once they've lost their unique identity? Once they've lost their tradition? Once they've lost their cultural heritage? It's like sheep being led to slaughter. It's like sheep, you know, a herding dog leading sheep into a gated area, right? A fenced area. And that's what happens, because if you don't have tradition, if you don't have God, you're not rooted in anything. You have nothing to fight for. The only thing that all those people, the people who aren't rooted in anything, the only thing they have to protect is their own existence, is their own lives. And that's why then the COVID-19 is such a great way to manipulate people, because you get them in such fear that they might lose the only one thing that is really important, and that's the fact that they're living. Now, if they were rooted in religion, as Christians, are we supposed to be afraid of death? You know, as Christians, why would we be afraid of death? Why would any Christian wear a mask inside of a church when the whole tradition is about defeating death and having eternal life? And then if you're a Protestant and you believe you get that just from faith alone, why are you wearing a mask? Why are you afraid of death? Makes no sense. And that then highlights that that Protestant that's still wearing the mask and that's totally afraid to die, you are one with the sheep that are debased. You may be inside of a church, but you don't have a tradition. because your tradition is always changing, and that, or therefore it's not a tradition. Tradition is something that withstands time. And if your church was against homosexuality 12 years ago, I say that because Barack Obama in 2008 when he ran for president wasn't for it, but now they're great with it, and they have women ministers and all this stuff. That's not tradition. That's like an evolving social practice where everybody comes together and reads scripture in a sort of celebratory way. That's not Christianity. That's not tradition. And so I think that's why then the fear of death is the ultimate manipulator of these people who are debased, who have no tradition. They have no cultural heritage. They have no wisdom. They have nothing to fight for. What are they going to put their lives down for? I know what I will for mine. But I guarantee most of those people, maybe their children, that would probably be it. Maybe their children they would die for, but shoot, half of them are okay with hormone blockers. So the fear of death then is the ultimate way to manipulate these debased people. And so when you look at Wuhan, China, having an EDM concert, nobody's wearing a mask. This was supposed to be the epicenter of COVID-19. And nobody's social distancing. There's thousands of people in a crowd, shoulder to shoulder, jumping up and down, listening to music. And then you look at America. Look at Europe. Why are they the way they are? Why are they so afraid? Why is everybody wearing masks? Why aren't people standing up? Why aren't people taking their authority? Why aren't people highlighting the irrational and illogical nature of all this stuff? It's because they're too debased. They have no tradition. They have no roots. They have no foundation. The only thing that they have is the fact that they're alive, and therefore then their possessions and all that stuff. And that is their main motivator. And that is why then they're in a state of fear. That is then why they're so reticent to wear masks and then yell at other people for endangering their health or whatnot. It's ridiculous. Anyways, that finishes that section. Gosh, I can't believe I rambled for now an hour and 6 minutes on that. So the next little thing that I have to say is it's called false forms of identity. False forms of identity. And it's just a few things that I wrote down in regards to things we have to watch out for. Again, not necessarily you and I, because if you're rooted within a religious tradition, again, a correct religious tradition like Christianity, you don't have so much to worry about. But I think these are useful things to at least look at and see other people who are debased, who have no foundation, who have been totally divorced from tradition, and then how they find forms of identity within the world. And so, number one, as I already mentioned, is politics. And so, politics allow our morality to be shaped by secular politics. So, politics, for a lot of people, is their main source of identity. Whether maybe you ask them, maybe they're not going to just put that forward, they're not going to just say, yeah, being a Democrat or being a conservative is my sole source of identity. But you start getting into the ideologies. Oh, well, I'm a communist. Oh, well, I'm a free market. And then you see, okay, well, these things become more and more and more discussed. That pretty soon you're a Democrat, you're a progressive, let's say you're a 40 years old white woman, and you are now for abortion. You're in the name of health. In the name of health, you're for abortion. In the name of love, you're for pedophilia. In the name of love, you're for homosexual, for all LGBTQ stuff. In the name of true development, child development, you're in favor of hormone blockers. And this is all totally morally okay with you. This is all totally fine for you because your identity is rooted in politics. And so therefore your morality is shaped by your politics. And therefore your moral worth is shaped by your politics. And now we come to a place where a lot of people exist in America, is that your moral worth is related to your politics. In 2020, that's actually probably true, because I don't see, if you're a progressive, if you push any sort of progressive agenda, yeah, your morality, your worldview, it's screwed up. Like, I do judge you based on that. I do. I judge. I know we're not supposed to judge each other. We're not supposed to judge people. But sorry, I do. And we'll just leave it at that. But because your soul identity becomes tied with politics, this, whether you're conscious of it or not, this is a feedback loop in regards to narcissism and self-worship. It always leads, this is my opinion, so I shouldn't say always, but from my perspective, it tends to always lead in these ways to atheism, to an absence of God. It leads to an atheism because you don't need God if you feel like you have, your morality already in place based on secular politics. You don't need a God if, you believe in knowledge based on whatever your political party says, your epistemology. You don't need a God if your political party only says they believe in science and they say there's no such thing as metaphysics. So I said those three because epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics tend to be the areas in which you shape worldviews. So because of all this, because your morality is now shaped by your politics, because that always leads, or generally leads, towards self-worship in one way or another, whether you're outright worshiping yourself, I doubt that, but it comes back to this idea that you have ultimate supremacy, or you have ultimate ability to say what's right or wrong, this or that, that it leads you to being a pawn in a fight over power. You see, because your identity is mixed in with politics, the people at the very top of the ladders are using politics and political ideologies as vehicles to mobilize individuals for their interests, for their purposes. And so if your identity is wrapped up in your political ideology, you are already a pawn. You're already a pawn to a fight in creation over power. One of which, if you're a Christian, you shouldn't be interested in necessarily. You might want to get into politics, do this or that. I can understand wanting to do good things. That's fine. My point is, political ideologies are manipulated vehicles, and therefore they're not saviors, right? Trump ain't going to save you. Some politician in the future isn't going to save you. Obama didn't save anybody. Politics doesn't save people. And when you get wrapped up into that stuff, whether it be the Antifa, or even, the sort of free market conservatism, the Zion free market conservative person, same thing. Same thing, because really their worldview is wrapped up in their politics. That's why they feel the way they do about Israel. And again, it could tie back into their Protestant theology depending on where they come from, but ultimately they're a pawn in a fight over power. And so tradition should shape politics, not the other way around, right? Our traditions should shape the boundaries of our political parties and our political conversations, not the other way around. And the other way around is exactly what happened, is that politics now have more influence on your church than your church does on politics. And I don't just mean, political powers that shut down churches for COVID-19. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that, just think about this, guys. 12 years ago, the societal opinion on homosexual marriage was so low that Barack Obama, to get elected as a black man, had to say that he did not support that stuff. Now, whether he's married to Michael or not, that's a whole nother question. I'm not going to get into that. But that was 12 years ago. In 12 years, look at where we are now. Who has had more power and more influence on society? Politics onto the church, or the churches onto politics? And it's quite clear which direction that movement is moving. And so that was the last thing that I wanted to say about politics, is that your morality begins to be shaped by secular politics. It tends to always lead towards atheism. You're, of course, always going to be a pawn of higher forms of power that are just using you and manipulating you for a fight over power. And that tradition should shape politics, not politics shaping tradition, which is exactly what we have. And so the next area in which we form these false forms of identity are from corporations, right? This would be like the early Kanye West and his Louis Vuitton bag, and about labels and logos and all this stuff, and wearing certain brands, and wearing a Supreme sweatshirt with a hat. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And the fact that people buy into this culture, right? The people who then find it interesting, buy into it, try to purchase those products for what they represent. One, these people generally aren't going to have a true self, right? They're not going to be totally individuated individuals. They're going to be just like everybody else, generally speaking. And so when corporations become our forms of identity, there's a feedback loop that emerges in regards to a consuming of our identity. And so meaning then is found in consumerism. And I say again, this is a big problem within our country in America, but now this has been exported throughout the world, right? And so that's why I think the consumerism and the brand loyalty stuff in China is so high, right? They're an atheistic nation, communistic nation, highly technocratic nation, and people love brands, and they individuate themselves based on the things that they purchase. Same things happen in America. And so these are such false forms of identity that it's kind of laughable. It's sad that people fall into this stuff, but now logos signify your worth, right? Corporations and the things that you purchase can now signify your worth as a person. It's not what you know. It's not how you treat individuals. It's not the morality that you exude and then express and then live out. No, it's not about the things you produce. It's not about your productivity. It's not about your skills. It's not about your family. Your worth is based on the things that you consume. And a lot of people are in this mind frame. And this is how they form identity. So the corporations, the bags, the clothes, this shows that, okay, I'm at this echelon of society. You're down here or that. And I don't mean just dressing nice, right? I am all for more formal forms of dressing. I think that that has psychological and societal ripple effects when men and women start to dress more formally and nicely in public spheres. I think the casual nature of dress leads to casual natures towards everything else, or casual dispositions towards everything else, meaning an allowance for degeneracy to be normalized more easily, stuff like that. But corporations, because this feedback loop of now you're consuming corporate brands based on what they're saying. So now, okay, well, I'm an outdoorsy person, so I get North Face stuff. I like Columbia stuff. And so there's like this brands now signify who you are. No, actually, I loved Colin Kaepernick, and that's why I got these new Nike Air Force Ones, or whatever it be. That's why then the BLM and the what go woke, go broke. Look, these corporations are not going broke. Yeah, they're losing money, and it's very funny that we come up with these phrases, but you think Nike cares that conservatives don't want to buy sneakers from it anymore? You think they are laughing because they're trying to get into the market in China. They don't give a damn because they worship money, they worship mammon. We already get all that. So then think about the idiot who then uses these corporate brands to form their identity. And then because of that, the corporations begin to shape their values. Just like the politics did, the corporations do the same thing. And that's why we see such an alliance between the DNC and then the Fortune 500 companies. It's because they're all an agenda to change our values, to change our morality, to change our understanding and our perception of reality. All for the global homo agenda. And so the product, the end result of this, of corporations being the source of where we find our identity, is that identity then is a product. Identity is not something that you form, right? From reading books, from learning skills, from building relationships, from doing difficult tasks, from being an individual, having experiences. No. That's not important. Is that you can consume it. It's a product. You can go purchase. You can get money, and that's where I say the problematic forms of social media have perpetuated these ideas, to an extreme. And so now your identity, your worth, all these things, it's just a product. It's out. If you have enough money, you can go purchase your identity. If you have enough money, you can purchase your identity and then put on that identity, assume that identity, and then people will see you or treat you the way that you wanted to be treated. But that doesn't mean you're an individual. And that's why most of these people are not individuals. I think that's why most of Hollywood are not individuals. They're not. They're again, the stuff that they promote, they're idiots. They're not smart people. They may be gifted actors, they may be gifted musicians, they may be gifted comedians, but that has nothing to do with one's intelligence, one's morality, one's ability to be an actual self, a fully actualized, individualized self in the world. Most people don't want to take on that responsibility and that process of real individuation and being a real unique person. Of course, everybody's unique, look at your fingerprints and all this stuff, but I would say the majority of people actually aren't that unique. And so that's, again, one of the problems with the corporations as your sole source of identity is you become a product. Your identity becomes a product. Your values and your worth is totally shaped by the corporations and the brands that you purchase. And therefore, you're a no-name, you have no self. You're just a thing that consumes things. And so this leads to, I have a few more, another way in which people form false forms of identity, and this is definitely true. The two countries that came to mind thinking about this was, well, not two countries. It was like America, England, and, well, you could even get into Italy. You can get in most of Europe in regards to soccer. And then rugby and stuff down in Australia, or cricket. But sports teams as being another way in which people form false identities. And how sports and sports teams become tribal replacements, right, at a psychological level. And it's not that I don't like sports. I get the criticisms of, guys watching balls be thrown around. Yeah. I get the criticism. However, sports I like. One, it's live. If you actually have sport, we're not in COVID-19, so it's a live interaction. It's a meritocratic practice. So there's a meritocracy in regards to who plays, how good they are. And so seeing people that are greatly skilled at something, I respect all that stuff. I enjoy sports. I played sports. But people, when their identity becomes wrapped up into sports teams, when people are killed, when fight, so that's why I was thinking of England with, what do they call them, like the football thugs or whatever, is, they have these huge brawls after soccer fights. Well, what is all that representing at a sort of psychological level is that somehow their identification with a club, a soccer club or football club, trumps a lot of other things. And in America, you can see that with whether it be baseball teams, football teams, colleges, NBA teams, and how the wearing of sports jerseys, the wearing of sports clothes, which, again, as a man, I don't want to wear another man's name on my back. I'm not interested in wearing jerseys. That's something I did as a kid. I like doing that as a kid. As an adult, I don't want somebody else's name on my back. As an adult, the only time you would wear a jersey is if you actually go to a game. That would be a time where maybe I'd wear a jersey of somebody if I'm going to a Colts game or going to a. But even now, it's like I don't even want to go. I don't even want to give the NFL money. I don't want to give the NBA any money. I don't want to give the MLB any money. So I'm not going to be going to any of that stuff. But sports teams are a sort of tribal replacement in a world in which tradition is already so absent that they're looking for forms of identity. And people go so overboard with the teams that they support that it shows you this immense void in the Western world right now. That's why I was highlighting really all of Europe in regards to football, soccer, and then America in regards to American football, basketball, baseball, and then Australia, kind of rugby, cricket stuff. It's just crazy. Like, there is the fact that you think you're an individual and you're wearing, a Vikings hat, a Minnesota Vikings hat. Not that you don't want to support the Vikings. That's fine. And that's why the sports teams actually connect with another form of identity that I was going to mention, which was nationalism, because sports teams kind of reflect regionalism. So they represent regions and stuff like that. So I know for myself, living in Indiana, high school basketball, IU basketball, these things were like really celebrated because they're here. It's a cultural thing. We know the players, we played high school basketball against them, or, the state's known for basketball players, this or that. So there's like a pride in that. But it goes way too far for some men. And in those men, I would say a lot of them have an absence of a true identity. Yes, please smash that like if you can, guys. Anybody who has joined, who has just recently joined, please smash that like button. I really appreciate that. It helps with the algorithm if you can. And so sports teams, the next one I have is fantasy. And so one of the other false forms of identity that people form, I think, is getting too wrapped up into the fantasy world stuff. And so the first one I have is like comics, superheroes, and anime. And none of those are bad or wrong in and of themselves. So if you're into comics, superheroes, or anime, I'm not saying there's anything wrong in those things. And just like I'm saying there's nothing wrong with sports or being in favor of certain sports teams. It's about the degree in which you go with this stuff. But having said and thought about it, the comics and the comic book world, Gen Con, the Marvel superhero, all the movies that come out, right? This is all related to an absence of tradition because we don't have real superheroes like Christ, like God, ultimate superheroes in our society. So we come up with more fictitious forms of superheroes and stuff like that. And so these become sole sources of identity for people. And the anime, I think, is one. I understand that that's a form of art, and I'm not trying to demonize anime or anything like that. So if you guys are really into those things, that's fine. I'm not trying to demonize that. I swear. It's just that when you look at the men who get too wrapped up into that, I think they exude similar characteristics over general spans. So the physiognomy, maybe their structure. You don't get a lot of Dr. Disrespects out there that are totally wrapped up in superheroes, video games, anime, and all that stuff. I only say that because I think Dr. Disrespect's kind of funny because he exudes this uber masculine demeanor and tone while he plays video games. So he makes tons and tons of money playing video games, usually Call of Duty. I don't play Call of Duty. I don't even have a system set up. But he's obviously good at what he does. But you look at the general sort of incel, and I'm sure a lot of these things that they're connected with, and so the overvalorization of these superheroes, getting too wrapped up into Harry Potter, for example, that is all fantasy stuff. And you see these people, and it's like, why are you so wrapped up in Harry Potter? Why are you telling me what school why are you telling me that you're a Hufflepuff? What are you talking about? You're an actual real person. You realize that was a book, right? You realize that that's a fantasy world. You realize that that's not real. And so because, again, an absence of tradition, an absence of a transcendent mythology, not that the mythology means it's false. I'm using it in a more religious studies term. The fact that we don't have these larger grand narratives within our society because of the destruction of tradition, People go and find that stuff in superheroes. They find it in Spider-Man. They find it in all the Batman. They find it in the Joker. They find it in Iron Man. You know, they find it in whatever. Name a Marvel movie that's come out in the last 10 years. You know, and that's where they find their grand narratives. That's not necessarily a good thing, and it's wrapped up with all this different stuff. And so related to the comic superheroes and anime is Hollywood and celebrities. And so I saw King Rocco, he said it's not just fantasy and superheroes, it's also sitcoms like Friends and The Office. And I agree. I totally agree with you there. But also, so in addition to what you're saying, that it's also sitcoms and stuff like that, I'd say just to zoom out a little bit further, that it's Hollywood, that it's celebrities in general, that again, people form identities, and you know, I don't know, I'm sure some of you guys are single. It is terrible right now, absolutely terrible, to try to find a good girlfriend to settle down with in the world right now. It almost feels impossible, at least from my experience. And how many girls literally say that like they talk about their love for The Office as if that's a personality type. I know you guys know the exact same thing. Like, the fact you like The Office does not mean like that doesn't, that's not a personality. Like, you need more than that. And so Hollywood and celebrities, the cult of celebrity, getting, you know, with social media, then you can get wrapped up in on what people do, what they dress, what they say, all the stuff. And so it's another false form of identity that's usually wrapped up in some sort of fantasy. Now, I have two more, which are a little bit different because I say they're more real. They actually have a real component of identity, but we have to be careful in how far we go with it. And so the first one I wanted to mention was race. And so I think we've seen with like wingnats, with the whole rise in paganism, that we see the demonization of white men and European ancestry and Christendom, generally speaking, in culture. And so one of the responses to that from a lot of young men was to like go back to like Nordic paganism, Celtic paganism, Germanic paganism, and find identity within their sort of tribal groups, which, okay, you can understand that to a degree. And then usually that stuff comes back to race. And I'm not saying, that's why I'm saying this is difficult, because race is a real thing. We actually do have real racial differences. And those differences need to be maintained. And so in-group preference in regards to mating, I think is a good thing. You know, I'm not totally against interracial marriages. I have friends that are with, you know, women of different racial groups, whether it be Asians or Hispanics or African Americans or Africans or whatnot. But at a societal cultural level, I don't think that should be normalized. I think those should be anomalies for times in which true love is found between those two individuals. But I think what should be normalized is that all groups maintain their group identity to a degree. I think that's a beautiful thing, because God created us all. God created all of our groups, all the different racial groups with all the different attributes, detriments, benefits. We all have our own. Every group has their own. And I think that's a beautiful thing, and that should be maintained. So race has a real sense of identity. But is that your sole source of identity? Is your sole source of identity what your racial group is? And I say that's where we have to be careful, because it can't be, because one, racial groups are created categories. And so you can't take your identity and totally attach that to creation itself. You know, you have to be more nuanced than that. And you have to be able to argue for the preservation of your group preferences, your group traits. But that's not a tradition. That's, you know, it's sort of a secondary identity. Because even within, you know, Europe, how many different racial groups are there? Right? Differences between Slavs and the Germanics, Anglos and the Franks. You know, that it gets way more complex. And so we need to be proud of our racial groups. We need to maintain our racial groups. We need to have in-group preference. That way we can preserve our tradition, right? One of the ways in which you preserve your tradition is by finding mates within that same tradition, within those same racial groups. Facts. That's how it works. And so the fact that we now live in a multicultural Europe and America and Canada and Australia, no wonder. What are they trying to destroy? You know, like it's quite obvious. And so the problem with race then is, I think it's fine to be enthusiastic about your racial group, well, no matter what you are. You're African, Nigerian, are you Kenyan? All these are being Kenyan and then being Nigerian, those are different racial groups. So I think it's a beautiful thing to be enthusiastic and proud about your racial group and your ancestry and your racial heritage. However, as soon as you go into supremacy, that's when you're going to cross a theological boundary that should not be crossed. Because again, God created everybody. And so to begin rhetoric about subjugation or supremacy of one over another, that is not Christian-like. That is not even accurate. Now, we can talk about certain categories. We can talk about, okay, who tests the highest with IQ? That would be one category. But is the worth of an individual based on their IQ? Absolutely not. When Christ when you're judged after this life, is it based on how much you've read and what your IQ is on a standardized test? Of course not. So those things are not of ultimate value. And the supremacy stuff is basically moving in that direction of those being ultimate characteristics, ultimate values. And that's where the diversity comes in. I'm for diversity in the sense of maintaining the diversity that exists, not this sort of faux mixture of all peoples and then having peoples that look different say and think the exact same things. And anybody who thinks differently then is kicked out in the name of inclusivity. We have to exclude people so we can be inclusive. That's all rhetoric. That's all a game. That's all manipulation. So, not a real fan there, but the race thing is a difficult one to manage because that's a real form of identity. That's a real thing that needs to be maintained, that needs to be talked about more. But at the same time, you cannot get into any sort of supremacy mind frame because that would violate the whole idea of everybody being created in the image of God in the first place. And so I think race then at an ultimate form is a faux form of identity. Not that it doesn't have a form of identity. It absolutely does. And the same thing is true with nationalism. I would say nationalism, like race, has a real sense of identity. Now, most nations are mixed or don't have a bunch of racial groups inside of them. Western nations being some of the fewer ones that do. And that's also why they're the ones with the least tradition. They're the ones with the most problems. They're the ones with all this stuff. Nationalism is also one that's very important. That's a real sense of identity, but how you navigate that. And are you a Christian or are you American first? Are you a Christian or are you Italian first? Are you a Christian or are you a Russian first? Right? These things have to be hashed out to the point that you're a Christian first. Because now I just ended the false forms of identity. I've just ended basically all my notes. And I'm wrapping this back up to then the point of the ultimate point of this video is that you can't have your identity rooted within creation. And so you have to realize that our identity is found in our Creator. Our identity is found in God. Our identity is found in Christ, and therefore that identity has to take supremacy, if we're going to talk about supremacy, over all the other forms of identity. Being a Christian has to trump the fact of whatever racial group you're a part of, and whether the size of that racial group, and then the necessity to preserve that group. So if you're, Irish, and you got red hair, and you want to preserve those Irish characteristics that are so noteworthy, and you want to find a mate that has those same characteristics, then I think that's a beautiful thing. But that all has to be secondary to the fact that you're a Christian. Being Irish has to be secondary to the fact you're a Christian. Being whatever, a Republican or Democrat, has to come secondary to the fact you're a Christian. And of course, and then if you're taking the Christianity seriously, I don't know how you could vote for Democrats or progressives, generally speaking, anybody promoting a lot of this stuff, because that would then violate the ultimate source of your identity, therefore the ultimate source of your morality and your value system. And by contradicting that, where are you going to go from there? That doesn't make much sense. And so then that wraps up. The whole point of this is that we have to find our identity in Christ. We have to find our identity in God. Make that first and foremost, and then look at all these other forms of identity, because it's not like politics isn't a form of identity. It is. It's not like the things that you purchase and put your money towards isn't a form of identity, because it is. It's not that race, nationalism, sports teams, and fantasies aren't forms of identity, because they all are. But the reason why all those other forms have taken such a prevalence and a privileged place in people's lives is because tradition has been destroyed. Cultural heritage has been destroyed. The reverence and appreciation for their ancestors has been destroyed. And that's why they're getting meaning from all these other things. We have to go back to tradition. We have to go back to God. We have to go back to our cultural heritage. And then that will color in all these other categories of identity formation. So that's what I have to say. And I will now read some of these super chats. First one is from Doorman360. Thank you very much, brother. Always appreciate you stopping in and hanging out. He said, we are more than just our genetics. We all come from one guy anyway, though. If you want to worship your genes, become a banker and get the snip. Doorman360, that is hilarious. If you want to worship your genes, become a banker and get the snip. Couldn't have said that much better myself. So well put. Thank you, Doorman360, for the $5. I greatly appreciate that, brother. I really do. And before I go to the next one, I just want to say, anybody who is watching who does appreciate what I'm doing on this YouTube channel, if you'd like to contribute, I would ask that you potentially go to my website, davidpatrickcarey.com or churchoftheeternallogos.com, and click that button in the top right-hand corner that says donate and set something up for $5 or more a month, monthly recurring payment, and that will automatically get you a website membership as soon as that becomes available, which it will be soon, I promise. Still working on that. But that, for me, is the greatest way and the most beneficial way for you to help me and contribute to what I'm trying to do and expand this to eventually making it a career. That's the ultimate goal. So next super chat is from Josh, another $5. And he says, doing good work, always share with friends. Question, if the world is in flux, how is there order and structure at the same time? Good question, Josh. Again, thank you very much, brother, for the $5. So the world is in flux. Indeed, it is. But to the degree that is in flux, that is the question. So Heraclitus, as you probably know, I've already talked about Pantheire, all flows, never step in the same river twice. This concept of the eternally changing nature of reality isn't new. It's been around with us for a minute. So when you ask how, if the world is continually in flux, which in time it is, agreed, how is there order and structure at the same time, is what I would argue is that order and structure is reflecting something that's actually outside time. That's how it persists within time. And so time being that sort of river that Heraclitus was talking about, that all flows and you can, you never step in the same river twice. To me, that, really he's talking about time. And so time is always changing. Matter is always changing. Creation is always changing. But what's uncreated is never changing. And so the laws of logic, which I think then is expressed physically in the world through like sacred geometry, pi, phi, Fibonacci, all these different things in regards to the sort of sacred dimensions and proportions of nature. That is, to me, all reflective of God, God's order, God's beauty. And so I think what we see then, and this would be my apologetic, is that we see God's work underneath all the things that are changing. That's why then truth is so important, because the all flux thing is where a lot of the people, whether you're like a pragmatist, so if you're in the pragmatic school of philosophy, you would say, yeah, of course, everything's always changing. That's why it's always about what's most useful and beneficial at that particular time, that particular period, because it's always changing, and therefore truth is always changing. Like you end up in epistemological relativism. It's like a mixture between relativism and utilitarianism. And so if that's the case, you're always going to end up with epistemological relativism. But if God exists, truth doesn't change, even though matter is continually in flux, like you say. So matter is in flux, creation is in flux, but the things, the energies that we get from God, the patterns of God within nature, those aren't going to change, because those don't come within creation. Those don't come from within time. So the things that are outside time give structure in a way to and allow the processes of things within time to continually flow and continually be in flux. That's how I see that. And so that's why the order is really interesting, right? Because if you think of your house, right, you're always trying to keep it clean. You're doing this, you're doing that. You're always trying to clean things, keep it nice and clean. And that cleanliness is a form of godliness, of course, right? And then if you just let things go, natural entropy, things are going to get dirtier and dirtier and dirtier. Dust is going to build up. You let it go forever. Eventually, nature's going to retake the house. And so that's like a form of chaos and dirtiness. And then once the house is gone, there's a sense of order and beauty there again, just within nature. So I just highlighted that because I think there's something really interesting about what we do in our sort of maintenance of order and structure itself, is a way in that we participate in these sort of godly activities, right? Cleanliness, structure, order, orderliness. This is something that I'm trying to work on in myself. And that's why, like tonight, as soon as I hop off this, I'm throwing melatonin down. I'm trying to get to bed early so I can wake up early. And so I'm going to force myself to start being that early morning gym person. So I get a heck of a pump and a workout first thing in the morning. And then by the time it's 8, 9 o'clock, I'm ready to go to conquer my day. And so that's the new routine I'm trying to get on. I'm going to start that tomorrow. And so as soon as we get off here, I'm throwing melatonin down and just going to relax for the rest of the night, and then try to get up early and hit the gym and get into a new swing of things, a new momentum. So anyways, Josh, thank you for the question. I hope that helped answering it. That was kind of the best that I got off the top of my head with the time that I have. So I appreciate that. Again, thank you very much for the $5, Josh. I really do appreciate it. And then Joshua Schmidt, he threw in $4.99, said, "Oh God, I am smashing." And he must be talking about the likes. Thank you very much, brother. Joshua Schmidt, thank you for the $4.99. I really do appreciate that. Really, really do. So, yep. So thank you guys for all the love and support. I really do appreciate everything. I've had majority of all my interactions, vast majority, have just been incredible, and I really am appreciative of all you guys who listen to me rant and rave behind this microphone, in front of this camera, and feel like that what I say has some use and some benefit. I mean, it's humbling. It's also it feels a bit empowering, and it feels a bit intoxicating at times, because you put in research, you feel like you know something, and then you come in here and you say something, then you get good feedback, and so just trying to balance all that stuff, stay humble, stay hungry. So I plan on producing a lot more videos here, coming more frequently. The last 3 weeks or so, it's like I've been doing different stuff, spending more time with friends, doing all, things will come up. So just been dealing with a lot of different stuff the last, I'd say, 3 weeks. And that's why tomorrow is the beginning of a new routine. It's a new year. It's a new year. I turn 31 on the 22nd of this month, September 22nd. I turned 31. When I turned 30, because it sounds so much older, right? It sounds old. Being 29 and then being 30, this sounds like there's a huge world apart. And when I turned 30, what I told myself was I am going to get in the best shape of my life. I did that. For the last year, so beginning in January 2020, I think I've told you guys, I got on, I wouldn't say I'm on the carnivore diet, but I eat at least a steak a day, often twice a day, and I feel great. I haven't felt better in my life. I've never looked better in my life. And when I turn 31 on September 22nd, that's when I'm going to officially start my fitness dimension to my YouTube channel, to Church of the Eternal Logos, talking about men's fitness, walking people through routines and stuff like that. So I'm trying to get in and trying to get that early morning routine. I want to build sustainable patterns and habits that are going to make me extremely successful in the future moving forward, because I don't have a problem putting in the work for long-term results. That's what reading does, education, that's what fitness is. That's what building a business is. And so I'm down with all that. And so, just trying to establish those patterns. Oh, we got a new super chat. Oh my God, $50. Don, $50. Dude, thank you so much. Jeez Louise, thank you, Don. I really, really appreciate that. He says, good discussion, God bless. My gosh, dude. Thank you so much, dude. Thank you, Don, man. Gosh, dang, $50. I really appreciate that. Really, really appreciate that. Thank you very much, Don. I'm glad you liked the discussion, man. God bless you and your family as well. And so, really, guys, that is all I have to say today. I do have another stream planned for Tuesday that will happen 100%. I know, again, these last 3 weeks, I'd say, I'm going to do this, and then a few days later. Tuesday, we are going to be doing a stream on theological terminology, and I'll be doing some of the more important theological terms that I think everybody needs to know. Some you guys will already know. Some I think fewer will know. And so it should be enough there for all ranges in terms of knowledge level and sophistication with theology. But we're going to be doing that Tuesday, and then we'll do another one Thursday. But if you guys got live stream topics that you'd love for me to talk about, feel free to email me. It's at, again, churchoftheeternallogos@gmail.com, churchoftheeternallogos@gmail.com. Email me and throw me suggestions. I'm always up for new ideas. I can always come up with an idea. As you guys know, majority of all my videos I just come up with myself. But if you guys have something you'd like for me to talk about, feel free to reach out, and I have no problem. So Tuesday will be a discussion on important theological and philosophical terms that I think everybody should know. But again, thank you guys for everything. Thank you for all the love and support. God bless you guys. Here we go. Red Pill Raccoon threw in $5 and said, Kodal is delaying chrismation because he doesn't want to give up his 2 steaks a day on Wednesday and Friday. Myself, but pumped for fitness vids, man. Thank you very much, Red Pill Raccoon. And what he's referring to is, I actually had a conversation with my priest, is he didn't want to do chrismation because we was doing this COVID stuff. Now he's retired, so now my whole catechism is kind of up in the air. I don't know how I'm going to get chrismated or whatnot. But and then I talked to people, and there's been a lot of Orthodox who, I know Father Deacon Dr. Ananias and Jay Dyer are on a heavy meat diet. So I think there's workarounds for me, and I'm totally fine with a workaround. It's just my priest, he mentioned about chrismating me, and then I told him about my diet, and then he said, "Oh, okay." And he was okay with me maintaining my diet because he was saying that he thinks that trying to go too hard on the fasting, a lot of people will get burnout, and so he actually didn't recommend all that stuff for like the first year or two, or to kind of slowly work into the calendar, the sort of dietary calendar for Orthodox. And eventually I would like to, again, once I get into the shape that I want to be in, I would love to discuss fitness through the calendar system. So like maintaining the fasting, and then doing videos of me working out and showing how I maintain all that. That would be something I'd be very much interested in, like maybe in a couple of years. Right now, I just want to get to where I want to be, and kind of dive into that a new discussion, new realm of knowledge. Talking about fitness, building weights, lifting weights, or not building muscle, lifting weights, not building weights, building muscle, lifting weights. Oh, Red Cool. Yeah, I was wondering if you would discuss that. And then he said, I also eat a lot of meat, but it does feel good to skip it for a couple days a week. Aids digestion, I feel. Okay. Well, I haven't missed for the entirety of 2020, and at this point, I don't want to miss. So I plan on maintaining my diet at least for the rest of the year, for sure, because of the benefits that I feel like I'm receiving from it. So, but I was not chrismated. I was not chrismated specifically because of my diet. Just wanted to throw that out there. But it was funny. Red Pill Raccoon. It was good. It was good, and to a degree, because I talked about this in a previous video. I talked about my discussion with my priest and how he was not familiar with my diet. But with COVID and everything, he wanted to wait for chrismation until people could be there for the celebration. So maybe he'll do it now, since more and more people at church are coming back. So actually, I'll ask him about that, because I would love to get chrismated so I can take the Eucharist. I want to take the Eucharist. It's the whole point of the tradition. So I actually speak to my priest about getting chrismated as soon as possible. But I appreciate the comments, Red Pill Raccoon. You're talking about how it aids your digestion. I'm definitely open to getting off the diet. It's been great for this year, and I feel like when you guys see the results, in just a few weeks, when I begin my fitness stuff, and I have my shirt off, you're gonna be surprised how I think people will be surprised of the shape my body is in, and yeah, so I'm excited to do that. But anyways, guys, thank you again. I'm gonna get off here. Thank you guys so much for all the love and support. Thank you, Red Pill Raccoon, for the $5. Thank you, Don for the $50 donation. Really appreciate that. Thank you, Joshua Smith, for the $4.99. Thank you, Josh, for the $5. Hope I answered your question. And thank you, Doorman, for the hilarious $5 comment about worshiping your genes. So if anybody, again, would like what I'm doing, please go to my website, davidpatrickcarey.com, churchoftheeternalogos.com, and click that donate button in the top right-hand corner and potentially set something up monthly, like $5 a month is all I ask. And that would greatly benefit me. But anyways, thank you guys. Love you for everything. And as always, until next time,